Greetings. My name is Dr. Juan Ramon Aviles Morales. I am a medical doctor. I am not a PhD, but I am an amateur genetic genealogist. And I just want to share with you information that shows that I have a connection to the Taino Nation and that I am Taino. Well, I just want to go over some things. On the bottom of each slide, there will be a link to my reference for those of you who want to check whatever I post on, so that way it can be verified. First of all, to my friends and colleagues who do not know what a Taino is, Tainos are the indigenous people who were found in the Caribbean at the time of Columbus when he first arrived. Taino people that were located in, as you can see, in Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, which was Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and according to Irvin Rouse, which you'll see in the next slide, there were three types of Tainos, really, groupings of them. There were the Western, Eastern, and the Classical, which are shown here on the map. The Classical was basically Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, and the Western was Cuba, Jamaica, and then the Eastern were mostly the Virgin Islands. Well, what does Taino mean? When Columbus asked the people whom he met in Puerto Rico, he asked them what were their name. They just said, "We are the good people." They were trying to distinguish themselves from the Caribs, and they really didn't have a name for themselves. They just said pretty much every group that Christopher Columbus came in contact with, they said we were the good people. Next question is, how do I have a connection to the Taino Nation? That's a good question you might have. Well, I took some historical data from different tribes around the world, and what I came up with is matrilineal descent, the line from mother to daughter or mother to son, that would allow the child to be considered part of that tribe. And the first example I have is in the Middle East with the Jewish nation, Israel, where there are two ways to get included into that tribe. And one is through conversion to their religion, because their tribe has a religious component to it. And the other is, as we see down here, that's I highlighted in black, matrilineal descent. So this was a rabbinical assembly, and they reaffirmed that the lineage of membership into that tribe is through the mother. So if a child is born to a Jewish father and another person who is non-Jewish, the mother being, they're not considered, the child would not be considered Jewish unless they convert. Here's another tribe in Indonesia that also has a matrilineal descent. And in this tribe, which is interesting, is the male child had to be responsible for his sister's and mother's clan. So there was a loyalty to the maternal line, not the paternal line. And back closer to home, in the Native American lines, the Iroquois had a matrilineal system, but this was prior to the arrival of Europeans. Once the Europeans arrived, and here's my source down here, they pretty much, the Iroquois meaning, uh, adapted a patriarchal society. But prior to that, it was matrilineal, which is interesting. Another example is through the Cherokee Nation, and again, you can read my source on the bottom, which states that prior to the 19th century, uh, the Cherokee Nation also had a strong matrilineal history of descent. The line of descent was through the mother. And here are three examples of journal articles and books that list that the Taino Nation was a matrilineal society. Now, some of you might ask, what if my maternal DNA is not from the Taino Nation? What if it's another? That does not discount you from being Taino. There are other ways of showing lineage to the Taino Nation, and there are acceptable, including records, birth records, showing that you have a line to the Tainos. We today now seem to be more incorporating other lines of demonstrating lines of descent, including autosomal DNA, which I'll get to in a moment, records from, like I mentioned earlier, birth certificates, death certificates, or records of such. But here I'm making an argument that I can trace my lineage through the matrilineal line. So how does that apply to me? This image here is very telling of my story in regards to finding a connection to the Taino Nation. And one is before 2003, for 200 years, we were told that the Taino Nation was extinct. But we have evidence now to demonstrate that that's not true. And this image here, which actually looks like my mother, has the mitochondrial DNA, or the mitochondrion, excuse me, and the DNA strand as the staff, and it has the phoenix representing the rebirth of our knowledge of our nation. So I'm claiming lineage or membership to the Taino Nation through my maternal lineage, which I trace through my mitochondrial DNA. Now, some of you might be asking, what is a mitochondrial DNA? What is a mitochondria? Well, I taught high school biology for 4 years, and this is sort of taking me back to those times. And I'm going to give you a little lesson on cell morphology, okay? The cell is the smallest living component of a living thing. Every living thing is made up of a cell, okay? So if we take up a cell, we will see there are different parts. The part that's labeled number 2 is actually the nucleus. That's sort of like the brain, or better yet, the computer of this of the cell. It contains the DNA, the blueprint of what proteins and other functions the nucleus is going to help perform for the cell. Most of the DNA in the cell is located in the nucleus. There is one exception, and that is the mitochondrion, which is labeled number 9. The mitochondria is like an organ, we call it an organelle, that contains DNA separately from the nucleus, and the mitochondria is actually in charge of getting the cell energy. It's the powerhouse of the cell. And the mitochondria actually, as you will see in the next slide, is transmitted from mother to daughter. Actually, it's the following slide, excuse me. So here's a picture close up of the mitochondria, and we could see the structure, and then inside the mitochondria we have circular DNA, which is actually different from the nucleus. So you see the circular DNA, that's the DNA that is passed on from mother to child. Okay, so it'll be mother to daughter or mother to son, not father to child. There are a few exceptions to that, but it's very rare, and I will explain how we know this. If you look at this slide, you can see there is a diagram showing the blue female, who is the mother of these children, who has a genetic condition that is a faulty enzyme or a faulty part of the mitochondrion that is not working, and it creates a disease, okay, a disease state. It's a mitochondrial disease, and we studied these diseases, and we noted that these diseases are only passed from mother to child. If we take a same person, a male that has the same disease, none of his children will get the disease. So that's how we come up with the conclusion that mitochondrial DNA is passed on from mother to child. So the DNA, people might be asking, what is it? DNA is a deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a nucleotide. It's a type of a molecule that's found, like I said, in your nucleus, in your cells, and it has a double helix, like a twisted pattern, and it has four subunits, which are A, T, C, and G. That's our alphabet. That's what spells out who we are. Now, there are DNA testing companies. I listed the three big ones that actually test for what's called autosomal DNA and mitochondrial DNA. I'm not going to get into that in depth now. That is another video for another time. But I use family tree DNA and to test my mitochondrial DNA. And here were my results. Oh, before I get into that, I'm sorry. Mitochondrial DNA, there are four types that are native, okay? Actually five, but the fifth one is more of a isolated area. So if we look at North and South America, you can see the A, B, C, and D. These are all the subtypes or the groups that are from the mitochondrial DNA. They call them haplogroups. You'll see the letter B, and then you might see numbers afterwards. The letter itself is what we call a macro haplogroup, and then you get smaller pieces or smaller subunits, and those are what we call the subclades or haplogroups themselves. So here we see the worldwide distribution of the different mitochondrial haplogroups. And North America, or Native American, is accepted to be A, B, C, D, and X. X is mostly on one part of Canada with the Eskimos. And here we go. Here's another representation showing how the distribution of the different haplogroups are in North and South America, and it also looks at the language. So just to show evidence, proof of mitochondrial DNA, the different haplogroups from Native Americans, I'm listing journal articles. This is research, and if you notice, it's in the 90s. This is accepted. This is standard already. You don't see new research on this because it's already been proven. There's a multitude of evidence that the haplogroups A, B, C, and D, and X belong to Native American people. They also can be found in Eastern Asian populations. For example, in populations in Mongolia and what have you. But I'm not going to get into that right now. Generally speaking, A, B, C, and D, and X are for native populations, and East, Northeast Asian populations. Here are my results from Family Tree DNA. My haplogroup was A, and then the sub haplogroup was T152C and exclamation point. Okay, this is the furthest, highest research you can do on your mitochondrial DNA. So I am haplogroup A. That shows that my maternal line was Native American, and this is proven by my matches that I have on Family Tree DNA, which is a good thing, is you find other people who have similar matches. And all of these people that are up here, I had to cross them out for privacy concerns. They all had the same haplogroup, and they were all from Puerto Rico. Here is my autosomal DNA results from ancestry DNA, and they did a whole population study that I will get into in another video. But for now, just see I highlighted the indigenous populations within the Caribbean or other indigenous populations in my ethnicity workup done on Ancestry. And here's another. This is not my own haplogroup. This is a friend of mine who is from Puerto Rico, who is of the QM3 Y chromosome. That's another DNA test that could be done. And I just mention it here for completeness sake. And here's some research you could look at to show that this Y chromosome haplogroup, which is QM3, is from indigenous populations in the Caribbean, which is another way for us to show our connection to the Taino people. So here's some additional resources. I'm going to try to make this PowerPoint available so people can look at the different resources and check everything out. Now, some of you might be saying, well, the Taino Nation is not a recognized tribal nation. Well, there are international laws, and I listed two major ones here, treaties that were signed. The United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples and the Organization of American States also have a declaration themselves that outline the rights of natives to have their own, determine their own, have self-determination and their own sovereignty within nation states. And here I list some articles. You could, on your free time, go and look them up. You could Google this document. But I want to bring to your attention Article 82A, which states, countries shall provide effective mechanisms for the prevention of and redress for any action which has the aim or effect of depriving indigenous peoples of their integrity as distinct peoples or of their cultural values or ethnic identities. So through this treaty that was signed, I claim Taino heritage, and I am part of a tribal community that has worked under this treaty, this article of the United Nations that is international law, that we as indigenous people have a right to self-determination. Finally, indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes right to maintain, protect, and develop the past and present future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological, historical sites, artifacts, design, ceremonies, technologies, and visual performing arts and literature, which is very important. So there we go. So I hope you enjoyed this. Last one, I'm sorry. I wanted to highlight. So indigenous people have the right to maintain, control, and protect their traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions, including human and genetic resources, which is very key to what I was talking about. I appreciate you all watching this video, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future.